In a few minutes the voice was heard again, announcing that the seventh limb was attained. "Now, Jupe," cried Legrand, evidently much excited, "I want you to work your way out upon that limb as far as you can. If you see anything strange, let me know." By this time, what little doubt I might have entertained of my poor friend's insanity was put finally at rest. I had no alternative but to conclude him stricken with lunacy, and I became seriously anxious about getting him home. While I was pondering upon what was best to be done, Jupiter's voice was again heard. Uh, I'm very afraid to venture out on this limb very far. It's a dead limb, pretty much all the way. "Did you say it was a dead limb, Jupiter?" cried Legrand in a quavering voice. "Yes, sir. Dead as a doornail. Uh, departed this life." "What in the name of heaven shall I do?" asked Legrand, seemingly in the greatest distress. "Do?" said I, glad of an opportunity to interpose a word. "Why, come home and go to bed. Come now, that's a fine fellow. It's getting late, and besides, you remember your promise." "Jupiter," cried he, without heeding me in the least, "do you hear me?" "Yes, Will, I hear you very plainly." "Try the wood well, then, with your knife, and see if you think it very rotten." "It's rotten, sir, sure enough," replied the man in a few moments, "but not so very rotten as it might be. I could venture out a little on the limb by myself, that's true." "By yourself? What do you mean?" "Why, I mean the bug. It's a very heavy bug. Suppose I drop him down first, and then the limb won't break with just the weight of one person." "You infernal scoundrel," cried Legrand, apparently much relieved. "What do you mean by telling me such nonsense as that? As sure as you drop that beetle, I'll break your neck. Look here, Jupiter, do you hear me?" "Yes, sir. You needn't shout in that style." "Well, now listen. If you will venture out on the limb as far as you think safe, and not let go a beetle, I'll make you a present of $1 as soon as you get down." "I'm going, Will." Indeed I'm going," replied the man very promptly. "Almost out to the end now." "Out to the end?" here fairly screamed Legrand. "Do you say you are out to the end of that limb?" "Soon to be the end, sir." Oh, what is this here on the tree?" "Well," cried Legrand, highly delighted, "what is it?" "Why, it's nothing but a skull. Somebody left a head up in the tree, and the crows have eaten every bit of the meat off." "A skull, you say? Very well. How is it fastened to the limb? What holds it on?" "Sure enough, you gotta look. This very curious circumstance, on my word. There's a great big nail in the skull that fastens it onto the tree." "Well now, Jupiter, do exactly as I tell you. Do you hear?" "Yes, sir." "Pay attention, then. Find the left eye of the skull." "That's good. Why, I can't do that. There aren't any eyes left." "Curse your stupidity. Do you know your right hand from your left?" "Yes, I know that. I know all about that. It's my left hand that chops the wood." "To be sure, you are left-handed. And your left eye is on the same side as your left hand. Now I suppose you can find the left eye of the skull, or the place where the left eye has been. Have you found it?" Here was a long pause. At length the man asked, "Is the left eye on the skull on the same side as the left hand of the skull too? Because the skull has no bit of hand left." "Never mind. I got the left eye now. Here's the left eye. What do I do with it?" "Let the beetle drop through it as far as the string will reach, but be careful and not let go your hold of the string." "All that done, Sir Will." "Mighty easy thing for to put the bug through the hole. Look out for him down below." During this colloquy, no portion of Jupiter's person could be seen, but the beetle, which he had suffered to descend, was now visible at the end of the string, and glistened like a globe of burnished gold in the last rays of the setting sun. some of which still faintly illuminated the eminence upon which we stood. The Scarabaeus hung quite clear of any branches, and, if allowed to fall, would have fallen at our feet. Legrand immediately took the scythe and cleared with it a circular space 3 or 4 yards in diameter just beneath the insect, and having accomplished this, ordered Jupiter to let go the string and come down from the tree. Driving a peg with great nicety into the ground at the precise spot where the beetle fell, my friend now produced from his pocket a tape measure. Fastening one end of this at the point of the trunk of the tree which was nearest the peg, he unrolled it till it reached the peg, and thence further unrolled it in the direction already established by the 2 points of the tree and the peg, for the distance of 50 feet, Jupiter clearing away the brambles with the scythe. At the spot thus attained, a second peg was driven, and about this, as a center, a rude circle, about 4 feet in diameter, described. Taking now a spade himself, and giving one to Jupiter and one to me, Legrand begged us to set about digging as quickly as possible. To speak the truth, I had no especial relish for such amusement at any time, and at that particular moment would most willingly have declined it, for the night was coming on, and I felt much fatigued with the exercise already taken. But I saw no mode of escape, and was fearful of disturbing my poor friend's equanimity by a refusal. Could I have depended, indeed, upon Jupiter's aid, I would have had no hesitation in attempting to get the lunatic home by force. But I was too well assured that the old man's disposition to hope that he would assist me under any circumstances in a personal contest with his master. I made no doubt that the latter had been infected with some of the innumerable southern superstitions about money buried, and that his fantasy had received confirmation by the finding of the Scarabaeus, or perhaps by Jupiter's obstinacy in maintaining it to be a bug of real gold. A mind disposed to lunacy would readily be led away from such suggestions, especially if chiming in with favorite preconceived ideas, and then I called to mind the poor fellow's speech about the beetle's being the index of his fortune. Upon the whole, I was sadly vexed and puzzled, but at length I concluded to make a virtue of necessity, to dig with a good will, and thus the sooner to convince the visionary by ocular demonstration of the fallacy of the opinions he entertained. The lanterns having been lit, we all fell to work with a zeal worthy a more rational cause, and as the glare fell upon our persons and implements, I could not help thinking how picturesque a group we composed, and how strange and suspicious our labors must have appeared to any interloper who, by chance, might have stumbled upon our whereabouts. We dug very steadily for 2 hours. Little was said, and our chief embarrassment lay in the yelpings of the dog, who took exceeding interest in our proceedings. He, at length, became so obstreperous that we grew fearful of his giving the alarm to some stragglers in the vicinity, or rather this was the apprehension of Legrand. For myself, I should have rejoiced at any interruption which might have enabled me to get the wanderer home. The noise was, at length, very effectually silenced by Jupiter, who, getting out of the hole with a dogged air of deliberation, tied the brute's mouth up with one of his suspenders, and then returned with a grave chuckle to his task. When the time mentioned had expired, we had reached a depth of 5 feet, and yet no signs of any treasure became manifest. A general pause ensued, and I began to hope that the farce was at an end. Legrand, however, although evidently much disconcerted, wiped his brow thoughtfully and recommenced. We had excavated the entire circle of 4 feet diameter, and now we slightly enlarged the limit and went to the farther depth of 2 feet. Still nothing appeared. The gold seeker, whom I sincerely pitied, at length clambered from the pit with the bitterest disappointment imprinted upon every feature, and proceeded slowly and reluctantly to put on his coat, which he had thrown off at the beginning of his labor. In the meantime I made no remark. Jupiter, at a signal from his master, began to gather up his tools. This done, and the dog having been unmuzzled, we turned in profound silence toward home. We had taken perhaps a dozen steps in this direction when, with a loud oath, Legrand strode up to Jupiter and seized him by the collar. The astonished man opened his eyes and mouth to the fullest extent, let fall the spades, and fell upon his knees. "You scoundrel," said Legrand, hissing out the syllables from between his clenched teeth. "You infernal villain! Speak, I tell you. Answer me this instant without prevarication. Which is your left eye?" "Oh, well, it's this eye here," roared the terrified Jupiter, placing his hand upon his right organ of vision and holding it there with a desperate pertinacity, as if in immediate dread of his master's attempt at a gouge. "I thought so. I knew it. Hurrah!" vociferated Legrand, letting the man go and executing a series of curvets and caracoles, much to the astonishment of his valet, who, arising from his knees, looked mutely from his master to myself, and then from myself to his master. "Come, we must go back," said the latter. "The game's not up yet." And he again led the way to the tulip tree. "Jupiter," said he, when we reached its foot, "come here. Was the skull nailed to the limb with the face outward, or with the face to the limb?" "The face was out, sir, so that the crows could get at the eyes good, without any trouble." "Well, then, was it this eye, or that, through which you dropped the beetle?" Here Legrand touched each of Jupiter's eyes. "It was this eye, sir, the left eye, just as you told me." And here it was his right eye that he indicated. "That will do. We must try it again." Here my friend, about whose madness I now saw, or fancied that I saw, certain indications of method, removed the peg which marked the spot where the beetle fell to a spot about 3 inches to the westward of its former position. Taking now the tape measure from the nearest point of the trunk to the peg as before, and continuing the extension in a straight line to the distance of 50 feet, a spot was indicated, removed by several yards from the point at which we had been digging. Around the new position a circle somewhat larger than in the former instance was now described, and we again set to work with the spade. I was dreadfully weary, but scarcely understanding what had occasioned the change in my thoughts, I felt no longer any great aversion from the labor imposed. I had become most unaccountably interested, nay, even excited. Perhaps there was something amid all the extravagant demeanor of Legrand, some air of forethought or of deliberation which impressed me. I dug eagerly, and now and then caught myself actually looking with something that very much resembled expectation for the fancied treasure, the vision of which had demented my unfortunate companion. At a period when such vagaries of thought most fully possessed me, and when we had been at work perhaps an hour and a half, we were again interrupted by the violent howlings of the dog. His uneasiness in the first instance had been evidently but the result of playfulness or caprice, but he now assumed a bitter and serious tone. Upon Jupiter's again attempting to muzzle him, he made furious resistance, and, leaping into the hole, tore up the mound frantically with his claws. In a few seconds he had uncovered a mass of human bones, forming 2 complete skeletons, intermingled with several buttons of metal, and what appeared to be the dust of decayed woolen. 1 or 2 strokes of a spade upturned the blade of a large Spanish knife, and as we dug farther, 3 or 4 loose pieces of gold and silver coin came to light. At sight of these, the joy of Jupiter could scarcely be restrained, but the countenance of his master wore an air of extreme disappointment. He urged us, however, to continue our exertions, and the words were hardly uttered when I stumbled and fell forward, having caught the toe of my boot in a large ring of iron that lay half buried in the loose earth. We now worked in earnest, and never did I pass 10 minutes of more intense excitement. During this interval we had fairly unearthed an oblong chest of wood, which, from its perfect preservation and wonderful hardness, had plainly been subjected to some mineralizing process, perhaps that of the bichloride of mercury. This box was 3 feet and a half long, 3 feet broad, and 2.5 feet deep. It was firmly secured by bands of wrought iron, riveted and forming a kind of open trellis work over the whole. On each side of the chest, near the top, were 3 rings of iron, 6 in all, by means of which a firm hold could be obtained by 6 persons. Our utmost united endeavors served only to disturb the coffer very slightly in its bed. We at once saw the impossibility of removing so great a weight. Luckily, the sole fastenings of the lid consisted of 2 sliding bolts. These we drew back, trembling and panting with anxiety. In an instant, a treasure of incalculable value lay gleaming before us. As the rays of the lanterns fell within the pit, there flashed upward a glow and a glare from a confused heap of gold and of jewels that absolutely dazzled our eyes.